Hey guys, good morning. It's Tony. I wanted to go into my theory that I talked about yesterday and why I think certain companies are falling right now and others are doing better. And this is actually something that I talked about my video yesterday when I started talking about Bitcoin and its drop. Um, but also I kind of went a little bit into why I think PayPal and Facebook are dropping. And again, I saw Facebook's earnings report. It wasn't that bad. I mean, their earnings were actually pretty good. They actually just dropped based off of their future forecast, saying that Apple's sorry, based off of because Apple is actually changing their permissions and they're locking up their privacy stuff. It actually is hurting Facebook's growth. But apart from that, they're actually making money. This is it's not affecting their ad. It's gonna be it's going to affect how how they calculate targeted ads for people, right? So that's how they actually hurt. That's why they drop. I personally think Facebook's drop was over exaggerated. I think a 25 after hours percent drop is kind of exaggerated. I do think Facebook's going to recover. It's going to create a massive gap. And I do think Facebook is going to recover. I would probably wait a little bit to see what happens with Facebook, but I would probably buy call. I mean, I would probably buy shares. Honestly, Facebook doesn't. I mean, I think it's an over exaggeration, and I think this drop from 323 close down to 251 where it is now, like it's a, you know, what is that? A 22% drop. I think that's absolutely insane. You're for sure gonna have a brand new gap back here at 323, a huge gap. I think you might troll sideways, maybe down a little bit, but I think you're gonna recover back to 320, like three at close. I don't know. I think it was a super over exaggerated move, especially from a 25% move down. And after hearing Facebook's earnings and looking into the report, it wasn't really all that bad. The forecast was bad, and I think people just kind of over exaggerated and sold off. Again, and I think this is mostly due to a liquidation, honestly. I think this was mostly a cause of a liquidation, like a margin call, as opposed to actually somebody wanting to sell 25%. Anyways, I was thinking about FAANG, right? And FAANG is actually an accumulation of Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, and Google, right? And for a very long time, there's been a very big dispute on whether it should stay FAANG. And I personally think that we're starting to see an evolution of FAANG actually happen, where certain companies are starting to dissolve and not dissolve, but just lose value, right? There's no reason for them to be part of FAANG anymore. There's no reason for them to actually be considered in this top tier list. And I think the very first one and second one, the very first example is Netflix, right? Obviously, it had a major sell off after earnings because it said its growth was actually dying, but it's kind of expected, right? I mean, look at Netflix, right? And I'm taking this as a personal experience. Netflix has been showing up with really crappy stuff. I think after they stopped airing The Office, I'm not even on Netflix anymore. I moved over from Netflix to Peacock because all I watch is Parks and Rec and The Office or Charmed, right? Which is what me and my wife watch. And Netflix doesn't have anything that good anymore. They really don't. And all the original stuff that Netflix has is just not that good. And keep in mind, I'm long Netflix right now, right? I'm long Netflix for like $500, right? I think Netflix is gonna fill this gap, and it's going back to $500. But Netflix, dropped from 500 to lows of 351, which is, again, I think it's an over exaggeration, but I think we're starting to see the dissolve. Look at that, 30% in like a day or two. But I think we're starting to see that dissolve from FAANG, right? And it's something that I've been thinking about for a very long time, that certain companies no longer deserve that A1 position in FAANG, right? And two of those being Facebook and Netflix, right? Netflix is starting to get a lot of competition, especially with Peacock, Hulu, Disney Plus. All these streaming services, everything is just saturated, right? But again, it's just Netflix is no longer the single competitor, and that's all they have. That's all Netflix has. Netflix doesn't have anything else to go for it except its original shows, and all the original shows kind of suck. Let's be honest. And I think that's why it's actually starting to fade away from that tier one list. And then if you go with Facebook too, Nobody uses Facebook, right? Like, who uses Facebook anymore? It's only our parents, probably. Our parents, our grandparents, our uncles, aunts, right? Like, I'm 30 years old. I wouldn't consider myself young, but I don't consider myself old either, right? I don't use Facebook anymore. I haven't used Facebook in like 10 years, right? Everybody that's using Facebook is my older relatives, right? Like, I don't think anybody that I know uses Facebook anymore. Either everybody's still either on Instagram or on TikTok, maybe Snapchat. Um, but like all the younger people, right? Everybody's using TikTok, right? If you're like, you know, if you're like, under 20, you're probably using TikTok and Snapchat. If you're like 20 to 30 and stuff, you're probably using TikTok and like Instagram or something a lot, right? And it's just what people kind of grew up with, right? Like most of the time that I spent was on Instagram when I was still in like, college, late high school, I think. That's when Instagram barely came out. So, I think a lot of my friends, a lot of my family, right, are big on Instagram, right? And then TikTok, it kind of blew up during the pandemic. So most people, if you don't know this, TikTok actually got more views than YouTube in 2021. That shows you how big the platform is. But everybody's switching over to TikTok and Instagram, right? And nobody's using Facebook. And the growth that's happening is not big on Facebook at all. And I don't think it's actually I don't think it's gonna stay big. And I think a lot of big investors saw this when they pivoted over to the metaverse, right? Because somebody internally, and obviously, if Zuckerberg is the one that kind of initiated this, he, they know that something's up because they pivoted over to the metaverse. I'm not saying the metaverse is not going to be successful, right? But it's one of those things. I'm like, why are you pivoting over to a completely different business when you have Facebook, right? There has to be something wrong with Facebook if you're no longer, focused on that business anymore, right? So that's a concern for investors. Like, why would you pivot over if you don't think Facebook is going to be successful? And I think Zuckerberg and everybody else internally to the company figured this out. They're like, yo, we can't ride on the social media thing forever and all the ads and stuff. We have to pivot to something else because Facebook's eventually going to die and we need something else. So that's why people are, that's why you probably see this massive sell-off on Facebook. And I think companies like this are going to keep hurting, right? And I think these two companies are going to fall off from FAANG. And I think they're going to be replaced. Personally, they should have already been replaced by NVIDIA and Microsoft, right? Microsoft should have been part of this A1 tier list of FAANG. FAANG should no longer be a thing, right? It should be like MANGA or something, right? Microsoft, which is MANGA, is actually something that one of my buddies yesterday told me because I actually put, it's going to be like Mang or something, but he's like, no, it should be MANGA, and I'm like, that sounds better. But it should be, Microsoft, Apple, NVIDIA, Google, and what is it, Amazon, right? So, Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, NVIDIA. And I think that should be the A1 tier list. I mean, probably throw some Adobe in there, maybe. I think Adobe's fantastic. Maybe they belong in there somewhere. But I don't think Facebook and Netflix are gonna survive for that much longer anymore. I think Netflix has too many competitors, and I think Facebook. I think there's a reason why they're pivoting over to the metaverse. Just being completely honest, right? And I think if you compare it to Google's previous earnings report, Google's doing fantastic, right? Apple's doing fantastic. They're doing great. So, and I think Amazon's gonna do great also. Amazon's not going anywhere. Out of all these companies, the only ones I actually see dying off are Netflix and Facebook eventually, right? Apple and Microsoft and Amazon and Google, I really doubt that they're going to go anywhere. They're going to be here in 10 years. But if you look at Netflix and Facebook, those two business models actually seem like they won't last the longest out of all of these, right? And then if you bring in NVIDIA and if you bring in Microsoft to replace them, Microsoft's going to be here for like ever, right? NVIDIA is going to be here forever. They actually just started being big these last like couple years. And I think NVIDIA should replace the N in FAANG, and Facebook should be replaced by Microsoft. And I think people have already started doing this, but I think now you're starting to see that actual evolution of FAANG move into something else. Because, I think Facebook and Netflix are probably going to be the easiest businesses to fall off this A1 tier list. and they're going to be the easiest to be replaced by other companies. And like I said, I think it should be Microsoft and Nvidia that replaces these, and we're starting to see early signs of what can happen in the future, which is Netflix and Facebook basically starting its slow descent down to whatever low levels they're actually going to be at. So I'll see you guys later. Bye bye.